guys in the dark. Living life on the outskirts of a traditional periphery, you notice the brilliant symphony of patterns, streaks, and curves, painting a vibrant collage of images teeming with life. At least that's how routines and personalities of the common man appeared to me, with my way of processing information. There is also the gritty, grim side of the patterns, mentalities that gnaw away at your resolve. Uphold to the status quo. If you've been through the burnt of it, the wounds aren't quick to heal. Worse, you begin to wonder if there's a place out there for your situation. Looking back on my childhood and my teenage years, I was the unfortunate victim of nasty attitudes and abuse from both boys and girls, men and women. My life was an absolute living hell. Something to survive day to day instead of take pleasure in. For 19 years, there was no escape. I had very little in terms of support to count on, no shelter from the hurt, thanks not only to a harsh outside world, but a dysfunctional personal safety net already worn and rotting. This nearly drove me to suicide at one point. I was only 14 years old at that time. Luckily, I had come to terms with most of the abuse. The unfortunate side effect is, I have to live with the wounds and any triggers associated with them. Learn to deal with the drama from it. But I made a grievous error and only considered what one gender inflicted on me, while ignoring damage that the other had dealt in equal measure. At 13, I had to deal with severe anger and sadness bubbling to the top of the pot when recounting what the girls and women accomplished in cutting me down to size. I learned it was a mistake to file it all away and just work through the shallow attitudes of those boys and the men with no consideration for how the girls and the women contributed to it. At the age of 6 years old, I was diagnosed with autism. In order to be official, I had to undergo a series of tests for the mind, hearing, and coordination at a local general hospital. These came in the form of games, tailored to measure and gauge normative criteria. My mother and father would drop me off, leave me in the hands of various counselors and support workers. Needless to say, it was not a good experience. They just screamed at me, put me down for breaking rules, some even grabbing my arms and forcing normal motions out of them when I refused to participate in their chosen game or pick something up like a normal boy would. One of the support workers had once burst into the room during a hearing exercise because I was doing it wrong and became unhinged while I sat and quivered in the chair, shaking, a scared little 6-year-old child. These counselors and support workers were all women. In elementary school, on 3 occasions, I was attacked by a move of kids outside of the rear exit doors. Some were my age, others were quite older. They would scream and shout into my ear, crowding me in an effort to disorient my senses. I was led around in a few directions until groups of hands reached forward and took a hold of my pants. I tried to fight them off, but in vain as they yanked my pants down to the ankles, then dispersed in gleeful amusement at their handiwork. Girls participated in the deed alongside with the boys. I never told anyone about these incidents, not even my mother or my dad, for it was drilled into me, and to them, that my behavior was a problem in need of correction. So who would believe an autistic, behavior-challenged little boy like me? There was a group of girls in elementary school who would take pleasure in teasing me just to get a major reaction. When they succeeded in reducing me to an emotional cripple, they would sneer and snicker at me. High school wasn't much better. The young women called me weirdo and retard. Mixing amongst the young men's slurs directed my way in the halls. One high school girl, as I was working on a story during spare time in my computer class, picked up what had been printed from the printer and read it aloud in a mocking tone. She then ripped it out, and then wrapped the contents around my body, calling me stupid and inducing giggles from the others around my station. My biggest experience, I recall, was having a crush on a girl who sat next to me in computer class. She was struggling with her assignments, getting absolutely nowhere by herself. Me being the natural, kind-hearted Samaritan, I decided that I would assist her. We soon formed a camaraderie, working together on tasks that had stumped us. She was appreciative of the gesture, and our relationship soon allowed leeway to whatever was on our minds. Life, our background, anything went in terms of conversation. It didn't matter that she had a boyfriend. Friendship was just enough for me to accept. Until one day, she tried to force me into a game of show me your underwear. She initiated it with all the others. I refused, but she still insisted that I do it. Egging me on. Again, I refused repeatedly, causing her to lurch forward in an attempt to pull my underwear up herself. I howled in protest, fighting her off. She stopped, sneered, and then she laughed with all the others. Days later, after her betrayal, I considered our friendship over. Walking the halls, I was suddenly thrust up against a row of lockers. Standing in front of me was my former crush's boyfriend. His hand was firmly on my shirt. He told me if I ever spoke to her again, that he would kick my ass. My former crush stood right beside him, grinning the whole time. Just thinking about all these horrid events brings me right back to those times, front row and center. They were as fresh as they were years ago. I now realize exactly how much damage I accumulated in my mind and soul thanks to these cruel females, but support is hard to find. There's no articles or even stories on how girls and women could hurt and bully boys and men. Everything was centered on boys bullying boys, girls bullying girls, and boys bullying girls. Never any examination of what girls and women could accomplish in the cruelty department towards the opposite sex. When you're a man like me, hurt by girls and by women as a child, it's a lonely road. With nary a reassuring passerby in sight, society just seemed to wrap its mind around the notion of a girl or even a woman hurting a boy or a man. They jumped through all sorts of hoops to justify the girl's behavior, mental illness, influence. They didn't know any better, while tearing any boy or man inflicting similar harms. It really doesn't help that the repeated, popular narratives tend to reinforce what happened to me as irrelevant, and my pain refutable compared to the majority of the victims. A form of feminism was even thrown in my face at one time. I was told how my privileged status negated whatever I suffered from, since I benefited from institutionalized sexism as a pure white male. All they did was minimize and invalidate the raw trauma and feelings, and then would use sentences like, "It's worse for women. You're an anomaly. Boys bully girls and other boys. That's just a fact." The less polite charged me with failing to check my privilege. Now, not all of the feminists were bad. The good news is there were some that I encountered currently who considered my experiences. They didn't treat me like an oppressor. They left all this privilege talk in the closet, validated what happened by telling me girls and women can hurt just like any abusive boy or even a man. To them, I was the survivor of serious abuse, regardless of perpetrators, but felt it a bitter pill to swallow because their views were labeled anti-feminist or sympathetic to MRAs by the rest. There was another consequence of all of these injuries. To this day, I am anxious and afraid of assertive women. More of the feared capabilities of assertive women to hurt, since I've experienced the same hard-lined attitude flouncing me badly as a helpless young man. Much like stories in popular culture of strong female protagonists, I'm careful to avoid if they're developed at the expense of the supporting male characters. The latter are either made by buffoons, ignorant, stupid, or couldn't lead their way out of a paper bag. For the ones who are as strong as the female protagonist, they're quickly rendered weak by her aggressiveness, unable to defend themselves or even fight back like I couldn't. Whatever your position is in gender debate and equality, you really must understand that these stories like mine do count. You can't dismiss them, and I don't care who has it worse or not. I do exist and deserve to be heard and supported in equal measure. With ignorance still in existence, it does feel to me like humanity never progressed beyond the high school cafeteria. All around assorted cliques join together at different tables. You sit alone since no one bothers you, or even acknowledges you when you strain to appeal to their sensibilities. Or they give you the cold shoulder because you're just different. Switch them with the popular narratives mentioned earlier about bullying and abuse. They're all talking about their experiences at different tables, as if related to the subject at hand. You go around sharing your tale of woe, only to receive ridicule and snickers of amusement. Dejected, you just sit back at your table in solitude as others pass you by with turned-up noses. The only solace is your tears streaking down, tumbling in slow motion into the food that you are eating. Tasting it reminds you of your humanity, because you can taste your sadness. When my boys were small, we had frequent discussions about bullying, what to do if they saw it or experienced it. I laid out all the different ways kids can be bullied, physically, mentally, emotionally. And throughout their early school years, the other moms and I were always on high alert for the faintest whiff of bullying. Once the kids hit high school, most of us believed that we had given our children a hefty toolbox that could help them combat bullying. But what about us? Who prepared us for grown-up mean girls? Throughout most of my adult life, I've been surrounded by wonderful, welcoming women, the kind who go out of their way to include newcomers, lift up those who are hurt, and feel women should support one another. Everything changed when I moved from San Francisco to DC. I found myself immersed in a toxic world of aging alpha females who were desperate to hold on to their youth. If anyone stepped the slightest bit out of line, they'd tear them down with nasty glances, blatant exclusion, and knives in the back. I was fascinated. It reminded me of high school, shoved into better dressed and surgically altered bodies. These women hid behind the facades of being kind in the bless her heart kind of way. But truthfully, they circled like sharks at the first hint of weakness, or any perceived threat to their territory. If a newcomer didn't have the right look, the right house, or the right kind of kids or husband, they weren't even acknowledged. In fact, they were often gossiped about and ridiculed. After a few years of observing this ruthlessness and destruction that it left, I felt I had a clear picture of how adult women bully each other. I wrote a novel based on my observations. My response to the book had fell onto two camps. The first reaction was that real adult women do not behave like this. The second reaction was, unfortunately, that it hit too close to home. Among readers who had experienced adult bullying, they cited 5 different ways women can bully each other. Exclusion. This can be subtle, like posting and tagging pictures to someone on Facebook of a get-together that they weren't invited to. It can even be blatant about making plans right in front of somebody and not asking if they would like to come. Yes, no one is obligated to invite you anywhere, but there is a clear, definite line between being kind and being mean. The inclusion upon rules. This is where the group puts pressure on themselves to look or behave in a certain way, like in the movie Mean Girls, where they always wear pink on Wednesdays. Adult women will bully each other into what they deem socially acceptable. This is why eating disorders, anxiety, and depression run rampant among these groups of adult women. The mental side of it. Have you ever walked into an event, party, school, really anything, and not known a single person? It can be pretty nerve-wracking, but someone will usually make small talk with you. Now imagine if you walked into that same party and knew several of the women there. They don't acknowledge you, let alone even invite you over. In fact, you're imagining it. They seem to just be making fun of you. They laugh, turn their backs to you, huddle around a phone, laugh some more. Maybe you're going crazy. Maybe it's just in your head. The physical side. I do think that this is rare among women than it is men, but spilled drinks definitely fall in this category. So does shoving someone into a wall, or bumping into them casually. The goal here is to intimidate in a physical way. The harassment. Think about all those 80s and 90s movies that we watched as children. There was normally a character who was openly ridiculed and mocked. Mean women do this to each other. They gossip, spread rumors, they report things out of concern. They try to elevate themselves by knocking others down. When you experience bullying, it's hard to know exactly what to do. After all, adult women know better, right? Really, bullying has no age limit. Too many women fall victim to this fox sisterhood of female empowerment, in which only the requirement is ripping other women to shreds. That's not the kind of girl gang anyone should want to belong to. But it is oddly alluring when it seems like you're the only one left out. Unfortunately, The toolbox that I had made for my children doesn't work with adult bullies outside of the workplace. There is no one to report the bullies to. There are no consequences for exclusion, gossip, or even weight shaming. So what should you do? After talking to dozens of women who gave experience to women-on-women bullying, I have discovered the most important tool is self-care. There are a few ways to protect yourself when you are being bullied. Get off of social media for a little while, or block the women who are bullying you. Social media is a weird place. It does help us keep in touch with people that we care about, but it also can make us feel awful. If seeing pictures of get-togethers you weren't invited to hurts, or you suffer from FOMO, or are trying to keep tabs on your bully, you just need to pause your social media. At the very least, block the women causing you the pain. They aren't your friends, and they don't need access to your life. While hitting the block button or getting off of Facebook can be quite scary, it's also liberating to cut toxic relationships from your life. Talk to a trusted friend, a sibling, or even your partner. Nearly every single woman I know has experienced some form of bullying. By sharing the stories, we realize we are not alone. And having a sympathetic ear can help you frame out the hurt in a more understanding way and validate your feelings. You can go as far as to talk to a therapist. If you do find yourself in that position where you don't have a close friend to talk to, speaking to a therapist can help you sort through your feelings and identify steps to bring more peace into your life. There are a few steps that I will skip over because they're not the most important. Now, forgiveness. This happens to be the toughest one. I feel it is the most important, though. When we forgive, it's not the absolute of someone else's hurtful actions, so much as a tool that allows us to move forward without pain. We do not have to tell your bully that you forgive them, but trying to understand what exactly makes your bully act in the way that they do can bring you clarity to the situation. Hurt people hurt other people. Forgiveness heals. If you are being bullied, you do not need to suffer. You are not in it alone. Like children, you do have a toolbox. We can push back against bullying by taking care of ourselves, emotionally, mentally, and physically. My high school bullying story comes in a form of body shaming, name-calling, and the destruction of my personal property. I don't want to be defined for my bullying experience in high school, but it has shaped the woman who I am today, and it deserves to be told. I never thought that I had a high school bullying story until I found myself lost in an episode of 13 Reasons Why on Netflix, feeling more similar to a fictional character than I have ever in my life. I cried uncontrollably, while an uncomfortable beast woke up inside of me. This is my story. In this decade, we are asked to use the term bullying lightly, as it often comes with heavy consequences, especially in the school setting. I don't remember hearing the word much as a teen, though. Despite the fact, bullying happened every single day in the school halls. My bullying experience is unique, as a lot of my actions were a result of my friends' influence. One could argue that I had a mind and opinion of my own, but from a young age, I felt out of place. It was easier to fit in when I let my friends make decisions for me. From the first time I drank alcohol, to trying drugs, to being forced to hang out with a boy I didn't like, while hiding feelings for the boy that I did. When I make my own decisions, there were consequences. My mailbox was smashed countless times as retaliation for breaking up with a boy that I didn't like and wanting to date his friend. The group of guys that both boys hung out with tormented me constantly. They made me feel insecure, ugly, and worthless. One of my nicknames was Wide Load, because I had womanly hips before the rest of my friends. Who could have thought that a girl would be mocked for looking like a woman? It happened, though. The worst part is, while the boys had laughed, I giggled too. I wanted them to think that I was cool enough to handle their teasing. I vividly remember when I started obsessing over my body, once these so-called boys, and the girls that I considered my friends, pointed out my hips. I hated my hips, being the center of negative attention. I began to really examine my girlfriends as well, the ones who were called pretty and had boyfriends. Their straight hips, thigh gaps, and curl-free hair were all I wanted in life. Then one day, one of my so-called friends had pointed out the cellulite dimples on my thighs, while my legs were crossed. I hated my body even more from then on. Since high school, I've continued to struggle with a false perception of the image that I see in the mirror. From my curly hair, to the size of my butt, to my flat chest. I've never been completely comfortable with how God had made me. Was it not for my friends in high school conditioning the way that I think, and paving the way for what a pretty girl really looks like? Maybe I would have been more confident in myself. What is considered as bullying in high school varies, but to me, anything that makes someone feel less than, it's bullying. Bullying in high school is a common occurrence. The intimidating stares, under-the-breath comments, rude remarks. Kids both older and younger than me had more to say about how I looked and what I wore than they really should. The truth is, I didn't even have it that bad. My bullying experience doesn't compare to what others have experienced in my high school. Eventually, the name-calling ended when the boys had graduated, so most of the rumors and teasing went along with them. That's not to say that I never experienced feelings of inadequacy again. College was a whole other story. I would only take photos of my friends. I look back on the photos of myself, and I see an awkward girl, insecure with her body and looks. My high school albums are mostly filled with my friends, because I thought they were beautiful and perfect, and hated how I looked. I cringe at the thought that I couldn't see how incredibly amazing I truly was. I blame high school for bullying me blindly. Outsiders may say that I looked like the perfect girl. I was pretty, popular, and graduated at the top of my class. Things always look different to an outsider, though, and you can never see how someone is feeling on the inside, which is exactly where it counts. As a mother of two girls, I constantly fear that they will feel like I did as a teenager someday. Some boy in high school is going to try to shatter their self-image, or maybe some girl is going to start bullying them for the way that they look. I know that I'm going to want to call their mother and tell them exactly how they have ruined my daughter. In the big picture, I know that I can't protect them from the cruel people in this world. What I can do is prepare my child for dealing with bullies and teach them how to be a good friend. Hopefully they will learn from that, and they won't have nearly the trouble that I had in school.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.